Been about 3 weeks since my dad passed, and it's been 2 weeks since I came back to the UK from Thailand. And prior to going out there, I had this sense of routine. Not the best routine, I would say, but there was a routine, a few things I was doing on a regular basis. And since I've come back, I found everything's become very unsettled. Not just in a physical sense, but just in the sense of feeling a bit directionless. Questioning a sense of purpose in life. And I come out to nature often. Sometimes I have to force myself because I'd rather stay in and hide from the world. But I come out to nature, and if you notice, you've watched my videos before, then you'll notice the backdrop tends to be quite familiar. And I live in a part of Wales in the UK, South Wales, where the majority of the natural environment tends to look kind of the same, really. It's a bit like this, and I think it's great because it's just largely left alone. And of course there's parts that the building sites are now starting to encroach upon, and I can hear a digger in the background, which is what made me think that. But largely speaking, Wales is a very natural place. I tend to come to these parts, certain parts, as the year goes through, as the seasons change, just to see the differences in the plant life, and notice the different bird songs and see the migrating birds. We have some Canada geese that come here, and house martins and swallows and swifts from southern hemisphere. And from time to time, being outside is just enough to take away the desire for an answer, to know what to do or find a sense of purpose or direction. And I've had this reflection before when watching back some of the videos I've produced and edited, and I think all of us would like people to know that we have everything figured out, and that we have some kind of amazing life, and we have all the things that we want. And we want to show the best of that. But the reality is, for many of us, that's not how life is. And we get lured into this trap by people who are really good at showing that part of themselves, and we start to think, well, is there something wrong with me? Because I don't feel that way. My life doesn't have smiles and rainbows, and I'm not dripping with money and things. And from time to time I get caught up in that, and when I come to an environment like this where there isn't really much of that stuff, and it's just been raining quite heavily here for the last few days, I quickly forget that those things aren't really important when you put them into perspective. And I've been reminded of the experiences I've just had, as yesterday was Father's Day in the UK, perhaps other parts of the world as well. And when you've just lost someone close to you, and then you're immediately reminded of everything that's going on around you, of people celebrating and spending time with their families, it does tend to bring home that sense of finality that comes when someone is no longer there to appreciate. Of course, I know, and I said this to my dad before he passed, when he was coming towards the end, that the only place he ever exists truly is in here, and so I can always speak to him in my prayers, or in the moments of silence, or occasionally in the dreams when he pops in and says hello. And in those moments I get to speak to the parts of him I remember, not the parts that my mind wants me to ruminate and chew over, all the uncomfortable stuff which I saw when I was with him in the hospital. But that's a part of the experience too, like it has its place. And there's something about being with people in their last moments and losing people that you love, even if they're not necessarily no longer in this world, but just perhaps no longer in your life. For me at least, it reminds me that there is this finality to life, that there is a period of time we get to spend here before we go on to the next phase of the journey, however that looks. And I'm constantly reminded how much time I spend obsessing over things which aren't important, like buying the right clothes, or saying the right words, or being afraid of speaking my mind because of how someone else may perceive it. And that doesn't mean being completely ignorant of these things. It just means, for me anyway, recognizing that it's a part of the experience, not the entirety of it. And it's maybe slightly morbid, I don't know. But since my life became more, let's say, of a spiritual nature, or at least since I became more aware of that, I've had this sense, not just in the back of my mind, but in my body, that this is just all temporary. And sometimes that comes with a reverence, it comes with a sense of appreciation, just for me to stop and take in the fact that this scene, this moment, all of these sounds and sights, well, they'll never be repeated in this form, exactly this way. This is a completely unique experience to this moment, one time. And so there's a tremendous sense of appreciation that comes with that. But then, in the moments when things aren't necessarily feeling quite as positive, that underlying sense turns to more of a sense of urgency. Why am I not doing more with my life? Sometimes it turns into a kind of nihilistic view, which is, I think that's the word. What's the point? And I've been oscillating between both of those things since I came back. And if I'm honest, I don't have an answer. I don't have a clear path forwards, and I'd love one. Or at least my mind would love to have everything worked out, and that's a theme of my life. Wanting to know the answers and Again, I'll be the first to hold my hands up and say that I would love for people to think that I have the answers, but the reality is I have to accept and acknowledge that that's not the case, and actually that's the reality of life for all of us. And it's compounded too by having to go back into the world of work, and I'm also slightly reluctant to do that, and that's because my experience of the working world has not been a particularly positive one. Having spent a long time in the corporate world, it becomes increasingly hard to limit yourself to a very narrow form of expression when you're largely aligned with the greater depth of life. And the corporate world is a very narrow slice of the human experience, and not one that necessarily brings out the best in us, I would say. But then you also have the challenges of the geographic location I find myself in, which is largely a labour economy. And I struggle with my own perceptions of that too, but the reality is I have a household to maintain, I have bills to pay, I have a partner whose presence and love I appreciate, and I want to take care of her, and so I don't want to sit around waiting for things to change. So this week I'll be taking a few more active steps to go and find a means of contribution. And there's a part of me that recognises that's not permanent. There's a part of me that recognises anything I do, it's not going to be for the rest of my life. It's simply to create a means of service and to have some income in return to be able to pay my bills. And also to afford me perhaps the mental space of not having to think about those things, so that other considerations can be taken into account. Like, how can I share my life experience in a more honest way that perhaps provides greater benefit to those of you out there who are similarly, like me, disillusioned by the state of the world as it seems to be presented to us in this self-absorbed, materialistic, growth-obsessed form, where everybody is racing towards the grave, it seems. Not consciously, of course, but we're all in a rush to get somewhere, and the only place that we can get to where we can't consider going any further is, unfortunately, a box in the ground. So I want to reduce the pace slightly. I want to find a way to acknowledge the reality of the experience that I'm having, because sometimes it's not that great. And that's not to say that there's any suffering attached to that, because all of us can go up and down and not have to have the suffering attached to it. And the suffering is the part that we really don't like. And the sufferings, for me, is the part that my mind convinces me that is guaranteed when I take a job. And experience tells me that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't have to be the case, but how much of the time do we avoid doing the things which we know are right for us because of some idea we have that carries with it the guarantee of discomfort? Excuse me. By running away from the discomfort, we just carry it with us. Like I said before, I'll try and use a better analogy this time, but it's like the weight. We can shed the weight. We have to accept that the weight's there before we can shed it, rather than by running away from it.
Why are you all of a sudden wanting to make noise? Come on.
You may also notice that most of the time when I'm out, it's either in the early morning or it's in the evening. And primarily that's because I get to enjoy the sound of the birds without the sound of people. And I'm not necessarily an antisocial person. I'm probably, let's say, self-conscious to the degree I don't necessarily want to have the entirety of the local population on video, and I'm sure they'd prefer that too. It just leaves the rest of the day for other things. So where do I go from here? Well, as I often find when I'm walking, if a new path appears, I'll take it. If it becomes too muddy, I'll turn around. That seems to become a metaphor for my life. As if I knew it was muddy to start with, I wouldn't have walked on it. Or I'd have bought some better shoes. I think sometimes we have to accept, or perhaps consider, that we don't know the direction of travel. We don't know where it's going to lead us, because it's leading us somewhere new, uncharted territory. And that's scary at times, because we could be walking into a big spider's web or some quicksand or a muddy bog. We could also be walking into an oasis. And a large portion of my life has been spent trying to walk on the familiar tracks, the ones I've trodden on before. And knowing the results I'm going to get aren't going to be particularly good ones, but not having the courage to do anything differently. And this is how it looks when you take a different path. I think the natural world has so much to teach us. And if we spend more time in it, sometimes we don't necessarily even have to think about the lessons. They just kind of occur whilst we're here. When we sit at home and we think about it, or we watch documentaries on the television, sometimes we can build up such a head of steam of all of the negatives, we never actually end up going anywhere. I'm saying that from experience rather than because I think that that's how everybody is. I have lived a large amount of my life in fear, and so when the fear starts to subside, there are so many unknowns. I don't know which direction to move. I don't know what to do, or what to say, or who to contact. And then in all that space, when there is an opportunity, or I sense an opportunity to do something differently, and I don't, and the mind tends to bring up anything that seems to be familiar again, which for me at the moment is scenes of the last few weeks of my dad's life, most of which were not particularly pleasant. And because I've observed, I suppose, the nature of my mind enough to know that it does have a tendency to do that, I don't have to run away from it. And I know that that's not the entirety of the situation. I can insert kinder thoughts, more loving thoughts, beneficial thoughts, but we get caught off guard from time to time. So my plan going forwards, at least as I see it now, is to lean into... Hello? Oh, we have a bird that looks like it's a bit sick. Okay, I shall be back. That's the other thing about nature. It's very spontaneous. There's a sickly looking robin on the floor. He decided to fly off as soon as I came close. I think many of us would like to get to a point where life presents no further problems, challenges, where we've reached the top of the mountain and everything is just nice. And there are so many people out there who seem to be determined to sell us on this idea. Yet they have to use some kind of system or script or format to get to that point. You know, and you have to wonder, if you needed to rely on a script or a format or program or a set of techniques to manage your life, imagine if everything in nature did that. The life would be enormously complicated. Yet everything that surrounds us, especially here. Oh, we have a deer as well. Fantastic. Everything that surrounds us, just like that. Oh, that's amazing. Just finds its natural place. You probably can't see them on the camera, but they're just in there. We're so close to the road here. I've never seen deer in this part of the woods. They're so deep in the brush. They probably feel safe now. Oh, it's made my day. Life has this way of just ordering things that looks to us like chaos because it's not straight lines and circles and boxes and labels. Everything it fits. It's in perspective. And it's us with our desire to control things, have a guaranteed outcome. We're the ones who screw everything up because you go and cut down the natural world and put these boring looking forms in its place, at least we do now, made of material that barely lasts a few decades. Because we can't see past our own immediate desire for instant gratification, and that's really unfortunate, because as I've come to see, when I slow the pace down slightly, everything becomes a bit more visible. That's the only thing I can really do that makes sense to me in this moment to help me find a clear way forwards. Is to give myself a break. And if I feel a sense of sadness because of the way that things have occurred in the last few months, then I'll feel it. And if I feel inspiration, then I'll follow it. I'll do my best to share that as I go along, because I think it's helpful for us to know our experiences are valid and that we aren't alone in our confusion sometimes. So I hope there's some value in that for you, and hope you join me again soon.